chapter 5 of Jeremiah, first 20 some verses, first 28 verses. He repeats, Jeremiah repeats the fact that these Jewish people were hard-headed rebels against God. He mentions that they were socially, morally, behaviorally corrupt, took advantage of the poor people, took advantage of those that were, had problems to their own benefit. Their moral deficiencies were repeated time and again through Jeremiah's preaching and through the book of Jeremiah. They just lacked. They just had the opposite mentality that the Good Samaritan had in the story that Jesus iterated. In verse 29, he turns his attention to the religious leaders. You know, if the religious leaders are corrupt, then there's a good chance that those who follow the religious leaders are going to be corrupt. People in the area of religion, they kind of have the idea that, I have an accountant to take care of my, business finances or my personal finances. I have a doctor that advises me on health, and I have other people that take care of these accounts and so forth. And so I don't pay much attention to. I don't pay much attention to. I just kind of sign the income tax form. I give the information, and the accountant gets it in the right place, and I don't have to know all that stuff. Well, that's the attitude that many people have with regard to religion. They assign their religious practices, or they assign their religious thought to an eldership, a priest, someone that's kind of steeped in religion. And so here the problem was that these religious leaders were bad. So in verse 29 of chapter 5, shall I not visit these things? Now he had identified a whole list of corruption, and he says, shall I not visit for these things, saith Lord? Shall not my soul be avenged on such a nation as this? The question had an obvious answer. Certainly there was going to be a visitation from the Lord, and that visitation was not going to be good. When we think of visitation, we think of, well, this is something we're going to do good. It's a good experience. But the visitation he's talking about here is not going to be good. In fact, it's going to be manifested in the Babylonians coming in and obliterating Jerusalem. And he says then in verse 30, a wonderful and horrible thing is committed in the land. Now, King James says a wonderful and horrible. Well, this thing is going to be so bad that it's going to be, people are going to wonder about it. But what's another word for wonderful? Pardon me? Astonishing. What's another version? Any other version that appalling is probably an astonishing. Appalling is probably a better. We would have a better concept of this than using the word wonderful, because we think of wonderful as being great and and good.
The previous verse in New King James says punish instead of visit.
Okay. A horrible thing is committed in the land. They were just horrible people. Think of the most horrible person you've ever run into. And then think if the whole social order were of that nature. And that's that's kind of the condition of the Jewish social order at that point in time. The prophets prophesy falsely, and the priests here bear rule by their means. The prophets and the priests were in cahoots. Is that a good word? Cahoots? You understand what that is? They were in cahoots with regard to corruption, with regard to false religion. And the people and the priest rule or bear rule by their means. Now, in the Jewish social order, civil government, well, they obviously had civil government, but it was kind of a theocracy in a way. A theocracy. God rule. And so the representatives of God had a lot of authority. In Iran, the head honcho in the Islamic religion has more authority than the civil king. See, and that was, it was kind of that balance in that. So the priests had some. The priest and the had some ruling responsibility. And here's the pathetic thing, and my people love it. My people love to have it so. My people loved what will you do in the end thereof. So now think about this. The rulers were corrupt. The priests were corrupt. The prophets were corrupt. Now, obviously, there were exceptions because God's prophets, and we have, a dozen or so written prophecies. We have the words that they pronounced. So there were obviously good prophets. I'm sure there were good prophets that we don't know anything about, but there were a whole slew of bad prophets. And the people, my people, love to have it so, to have this corruption. Now, how could anybody love to have corruption? Would we like to have corrupt leaders? Well, we have a few corrupt leaders, Would you like to have, corruption in business? Well, we have a few corrupt folks in business. But decent people don't like corruption. Isn't that right? Do we want to have to deal with people that are corrupt morally?
We in here know, but there's a whole different thing happening today. I'm not really going to, name names and all that stuff, but in my opinion, there are people, like you said, in power right now that are so corrupt. It's so obvious, and there are decent people that support them. They can just do no wrong, no matter what. And I think it's all about money.
Well, if you're on the receiving end of corruption, I suppose that you kind of like it. I mean, if you can go to, if you're guilty of something, you go to the judge and you get off scot-free, you probably like that. But the implication here is that everybody liked the corrupt system. The system was corrupt, and everybody that, except those that were weak and disabled and widows and orphans, they no doubt didn't like it. But the general population apparently liked corrupt leaders. Now, you think that is so strange. However, let's bring it down closer to home. Preaching, teaching the truth is not always considered by the population as being something they want to hear. Is that right? They don't want to hear it. And so you think about this. Some religious leaders in this country are okaying all kinds of social and religious error, behavioral error, and a corrupting of the word. And people like that. That's okay. Fine. That's fine. And so we have religious groups saying that, these evil practices are actually good. These evil practices are okay. And it starts, with the leadership, and then the folks get used to it, and things are well with the people.
It's either benefiting to them or they're afraid. That's why they go along with it. And I give kudos to our preachers and teachers because you all tell it like it is.
So, it is. It's hard for us to understand what Jeremiah was. Sometimes it's not hard for us to understand what Jeremiah is teaching here, but then we find that we have a lot of false prophets teaching error, both doctrinal issues, religious practices, moral practices, and so on. And a lot of people just like that. So much so that when you teach the truth, those people we become their enemies because we teach the truth, you see. Well, getting into the 6th chapter then, he says, "O ye children of Benjamin, gather yourselves to flee out of the midst of Jerusalem, and blow the trumpet in Tekoa, and set up a sign of fire in Beth-Haccerem. For evil appeareth out of the north, and great destruction." Well, he's preaching this. Jeremiah is preaching this. Now, where was Benjamin in relation to Jerusalem? The tribe of Benjamin was north of Jerusalem. Now, where was the enemy? Where the enemy was going to come from? Where? The north. And so Benjamin was between Jerusalem and the Babylonian people. Now, apparently they were advised, the people of Benjamin, there north, in between Jerusalem and Babylon, they were advised to get into the city of Jerusalem. Why would you want, if you're out in the countryside, why would you want to get into the city? Well, Jerusalem was a walled city. The walls were there to protect the cities. It was more than a gated community. People get in a gated community to protect themselves from somebody. Okay, that's one of the reasons they do. But the whole city was walled. Well, why? What's he saying here? He said, "O you children of Benjamin, gather yourselves and flee out of in the midst Jerusalem. Get out. You say, now it's, things are going to be bad here in Jerusalem. Get out. You have a better chance out of the cities. For evil appeareth out of the north, and great destruction. Talking about, now he's talking about, obviously, the Jerusalem, the Zion. I have listened, or I've likened, verse 2, I've likened the daughter of Zion to a comely and delicate woman. Now, the metaphorical language that's used in Scripture is just amazing. He's comparing Zion, particularly the female portion of Zion, as a daughter, or as a comely and delicate woman. A person that's never had any hardships, a person that has not, been subject to the school of hard knocks. Everything's been provided for them. And God is saying, Jerusalem, everything's been provided for them. But there's a day of reckoning here. God said, I've provided everything for you. You're just like I have a word here, but I'm not sure it's the right place to use the word. But everything, God's provided everything. We just handled you with kid gloves, so to speak. We're just going to go on. I have likened the daughter of Zion to a comely and delicate woman. The shepherds with their flocks come unto her. They pitch their tent, that is, come into Jerusalem, come toward Jerusalem. They pitch their tents against her, around about, against Jerusalem, and they feed everyone in his place. Now, why do shepherds move their flocks from time to time? Well, we wouldn't know anything about shepherds. They eat all the grass and eat it down to the nubs, and then they move. And then they eat up another portion, and then another portion. Well, the metaphor is you people are going to be eaten up, right? You're going to be gobbled up. But it's like the shepherds that they move their tents from place to place. Sheep eat up all the vegetation. Well, you're going to be eaten up. Prepare ye war against her. Arise and let us go up at noon. Woe unto us, for the day goeth away, for the shadows of the night are stretched out. Arise and let us go by night, and let us destroy her palaces. I'm told through reading of scholars that in that ancient period of time, they conducted war during the day and let off during the night. Well, that's not going to be the way it is in this case. There's going to be a relentless. Jerusalem is going to be under relentless siege. It's going to be continuing. There's no letting up, not even at night. It's going to be ongoing. Woe unto us, for the day goeth away, and the shadows of the evening are stretched out. Arise and let us go by night, and let us destroy her palaces. They want to just really. And who's behind this? Who's going to be behind this? Who's going to be directing, so to speak, the Babylonian forces? Well, obviously, God is using the Babylonian forces to destroy his own people. woe unto us. For in verse 6, for thus saith the Lord of hosts, hew ye down trees and cast them out upon Jerusalem. This is a city to be visited. She is wholly oppressed in the midst of her. Remember, those of Benjamin were to flee out of the city. Well, now the Babylonian army is directed to build a ramp, into the city, over the walls. That's kind of the meaning here. Hew ye down trees and cast a mount against Jerusalem. A mount, against Jerusalem. Mound up. Go in and take over. Why? This is a city to be visited here militarily. She is holy oppression in mind in the midst of her. She is holy oppression in the mind in the midst of her. This was a city of oppression, a city of social injustice, a city of religious idolatry, a city of religious harlotry or whoredom. It wasn't worth saving. Now, when God decided that Sodom wasn't worth saving, what did he do? He wiped it off the face of the earth. Is that right? But he saved a remnant of the Jews. And he had that, and there was a purpose behind that, of course. Then here's another metaphor. As a fountain casteth out her waters, fountain, a spring, an artesian well, water, any area where the water comes to the surface, cold and pure. As a fountain casteth out her waters, so she casteth out her wickedness, violence, spoil. As a fountain casts, spews out water. Jerusalem, the social order there, spews out corruption, religious harlotry, just horrible. They're wicked, violent, verse 7. Spoil is heard in her. Before me continually is grief and wounds. Grief and wounds. People are wounded. Those that are, it's almost the idea of, might makes right. And so those that were powerful trampled on those that were not powerful. Be thou instructed, O Jerusalem, lest my soul depart from thee, lest I make thee desolate in a land not inhabited. Be thou instructed. We would say, listen up. We would say, this is the way it's going to be. Verse 9, thus saith the Lord of hosts, they shall thoroughly glean the remnant of Israel as a vine. Now, grape picking. Some are left. But those grapes that are left go back again. In other words, this assault on Jerusalem is going to be relentless. It's going to be now, later, and still later. So he's using that. that idea of picking grapes. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, thou shalt surely glean the remnant of Israel. As a vine, turn back thine hand, as grape gatherers into baskets. To whom shall I speak and give warning that they may hear? Whom shall I speak and give warning that they may hear? Were they, all these people, deaf? Were they deaf? And could they hear, physically hear Jeremiah's sermons? Well, yeah, they could physically hear them, but they weren't internalizing. They weren't paying attention. They weren't accepting. They weren't believing. To whom shall I speak and give warning that they may hear? Behold, their ear is uncircumcised. Now, previously, Jeremiah said their heart was uncircumcised. What's that mean? Pardon me? Yeah, it translated, had no feeling. No, it was just, nothing was there. And now their ears are uncircumcised. That is, they could not grasp, refused to grasp what was being told, what was being preached, what was being said. They were just refused to grasp it. Behold, the word of the Lord is unto them a reproach. Not only did they refuse to accept it, but they said it is false. They accused Jeremiah of being a false teacher. It was a reproach. They didn't like it. They didn't like his preaching. They hated his preaching. Is the gist of this. To whom shall I speak and give warning that they may hear? Behold, their ear is uncircumcised, and they cannot hearken. They can't grasp it. Behold, the word of the Lord is unto them reproach. They don't like it. They hate it. And they have no delight in it. They have no delight in it. Some people have a hard time with religious. Some people have a hard time with sound doctrine. Right? Some people have a hard time with truth. And so oftentimes the reaction is what?
Anger.
Yeah. They don't like it. They get angry. A lot of people have got into fist fights while studying the Bible. Some people have even resorted to killing the other person that they're talking with, the person they're talking with, because they didn't like what they were being taught. So they're going to stop. Now, during some periods of time, rulers tried to destroy the Bible. Is that right? Rulers, at some periods of time, have tried to. What would happen if you had a Bible in certain parts of China, certain parts of North Korea, certain parts of Iran? What would happen to you if you even just had a Bible? Yeah. Would be a death sentence, you see. Well, that's kind of the attitude, that was kind of the attitude these people had against people like Jeremiah. It was, they would be really upset about it. Well, so what's God's reaction to this? Therefore, I am full of the fury of the Lord. Now, this is Jeremiah talking. Therefore, I am full of the fury of the Lord. I am weary of holding in. What's Jeremiah saying there? You're not listening, and he's getting worked up. I'm full of the fury of the Lord. I am weary of holding in. I'm just going to let go and give sound doctrine, the truth. And I will pour it out upon the children abroad. Jeremiah was under great duress, assault and persecution. And he wasn't going to back off. He says, I am just going to let go with the truth. And he's going to pour it out. The word's going to be poured out of his mouth. And he's going to pour it out on the assembly of the young men. Who else? And assembly of the young men together, for even the husband and with the wife, married people shall be taken, and the aged with him, that is full of days. Pour it out on everybody. And that has another meaning, I think, and that's that when the assault comes from the Babylonian community, nobody's going to be spared. I mean, no pity on children, no pity on widows, no pity on women, men, young, old. And their houses shall be turned into others, with their fields and wives together. For I will stretch out my hand upon the inhabitants of the land, saith the Lord. Can you imagine somebody coming in and saying, this is my house. Get out. Kill you. Just, yeah, that's a good example. And that's a somewhat modern example. Their houses shall be turned unto others, with their fields and wives, their farms, their deer hunting fields. I don't know about the deer, but whatever they had there to capture and eat. For from the least of them until the greatest of them, everyone is given to covetousness. Now why? Why all of this? Why all of this? Well, for from the least of them and even the greatest of them is given to covetousness, that is to greed, and from the prophet even to the priest, everyone dealeth falsely. Everybody's a crook. Everybody's a liar. Everybody's a cheat. Got to be punished. They have healed also. They have healed also the hurt of the daughter of my people, slightly, saying, peace, peace, when there's no peace. I mean, it's like somebody is saying, takes the Bible and says, well, let's just take any part of the Bible, the Ten Commandments or the Beatitudes, and somebody comes along and says, well, now that doesn't mean what it says. That doesn't mean, that isn't the meaning of that. And they just twist it around to truth, to error. It's really amazing how people will take people who have no regard for the Bible will take, for example, the whole business of homosexuality. Say, well, that doesn't mean this. That just means that, if you're in a same-sex relationship, that you treat the person appropriately. That's what that means. Just give it a horrible twist, and that's the idea here. Jeremiah was out there saying, the Babylonians are coming. God's going to punish you. Straighten up your lives. Repent. And the false prophets are saying, don't pay attention, Jeremiah. After all, we've got the temple over here. After all, we've got God on our side. Even though they didn't obey him, we've got, we've all, Jerusalem has always been here. Ever since Jerusalem was established as the capital of the Jewish people, the Jewish nation, and the temple was put there. We're okay. Never. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about this old dumb prophet Jeremiah. Were they ashamed when they had committed abomination? Nay, they were not at all ashamed. Neither could they blush. They were so hardened that they couldn't blush. I mean, they had no conscience whatsoever. Neither could they blush. Therefore, Mark, that would preach, wouldn't it? Mark sometimes talks about this will preach. Well, that would preach that idea that you couldn't blush, that they could not even blush. Therefore, they shall fall among them that fall. At the time that I will visit them, they shall be cast down, saith the Lord. I will visit them, they shall be cast down, saith the Lord. When he talks about visiting them, what's he talking about? When he's bringing destruction on them, that will be their visitation, you see. Now, so Jeremiah lays out, what's going to happen. And then he says, what? He tries to reason with them. And he says, there, thus saith the Lord, stand ye in the ways and see, and ask for the old paths wherein is the good way, and walk therein, and you shall find rest in your souls. Now, is that a good message for 2019, November or December, America? Is that a good message for the world, to seek the old paths? Well, it certainly is a good message. And what's he talking about? That he'd seek the old paths. What were the old paths? Pardon me? And more specifically, obeying the law, in that time the law of Moses, obeying the feasts, instituting civil justice, instituting kindness and compassion, like Micah the prophet said, to love mercy. And and walk humbly with thy God. You see, those were the old paths. And those old paths needed to be sought out. And the only cure, Anita? I'm gone. I'm leaving you. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. So the old paths would be good for the religious world, the religious people of America, including the churches of Christ.